Okay. Oops. That looks good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good. Welcome to you. Welcome also to all of you watching this online. We have a lot of great questions. Let me just see that. Is that working? Yes. Okay, just checking the stream. We're in good shape. Let us begin. First question from our regular student, Prashanto, in Bangladesh. He asks, I understand that true enlightenment requires effort and discipline, but history shows that it can happen without conscious effort or due to good karma in past lives. So it's a question I think that many people have. They may not utter it. First of all, I understand that true enlightenment requires effort and discipline. Is that what I've taught? Yeah, somebody said correctly. So in keeping with the teachings of Shankaracharya and this entire tradition of Advaita Vedanta, true enlightenment requires atma-jnanam, discovery of your true nature, your true self, and the reason for that is the lack of enlightenment, bondage, bandha, is due to ignorance. This is one of the great revelations of the ancient rishis. You are already what you want to become, but you don't know it. Ignorance is the central problem. And the solution to ignorance, of course, is knowledge, and in particular knowledge of your true self, which is gained through atma vichara, self-inquiry, guided by these teachings. Effort and discipline are necessary for the sake of the knowledge. So it's the knowledge that makes you enlightened, not the effort and discipline. But without the effort and discipline, you won't gain the knowledge. So it's discovery of your true nature, recognition of your true self as Satchidananda Atma. Prashanta goes on to say, but history shows it can happen without conscious effort or due to good karma in past lives. We'll deal with history in just a moment, but just to focus, if enlightenment is due to knowledge, self-recognition, tell me, does anyone without conscious effort or due to good karma, do you learn how to use a computer? Just good karma? You sit down, or better yet, computer programming, writing programs in C++, or whatever is your language of choice. Do you get that without conscious effort? Do you get that due to good karma? Then we have to say, well, what about these stories that we have in the tradition? There are many stories of enlightened saints. Well, first of all, they're stories, which means you cannot take them as historically accurate records of facts. This is our modern standard for history. It's very different than the ancient standard for history. Ancient standard of history had a much, we'll say, lower bar, so to speak. In modern times, we demand evidence. So there are many claims made in various texts and scriptures about spontaneous enlightenment. Those claims are made, however, without evidence, so they wouldn't meet the modern standard of being historical records. That's my point. But then you say, but Swamiji, certainly somebody got enlightened without studying all this Vedanta. Many, not someone, many. got enlightened without a formal study of Advaita Vedanta. Doesn't mean they didn't get knowledge. It means that somehow they gained this knowledge. Somehow they engaged in a process of self-inquiry, atma vichara. Somehow they gained this recognition of their true nature as Satchidananda Atma, but without the formal study of Advaita Vedanta. Why not? For someone who is an extraordinary prodigy, think of a spiritual prodigy, maybe they don't need all of this. Absolutely, I would agree to that. But for ordinary people like you and me, okay, you get the point. We need these teachings. Next question. This is very thoughtful questions from Praveen, who lives in Los Angeles. Originally from Hyderabad, then Chennai, then Boston, then Los Angeles. He gives the whole thing here. Nice. So, Praveen asks, on experience as a valid means of knowledge. Is experience a valid means to gain this self-knowledge? He says, it seems that, and which is to say, those who gained enlightenment without formal study of Vedanta, was it mere experience? And those of you who have heard me before, you know that constantly I refute that experience alone can make you enlightened. And there are so many reasons for that. We'll get into some of the reasons in responding to Praveen's question. But just to make the point, we won't touch on this in his question, so I'll answer it right now. Satchidananda Atma, pure consciousness, is already present in your experience. 100%. If you are conscious right now, that consciousness is Satchidananda Atma. You may not know it, you may not understand your true nature, but it's already present in your experience. It's not remote from your experience. So that's one argument. Let's get into Praveen's question then, and we'll get in and see some other arguments here. It seems that while every experience is not a fact, I think he's quoting me from a recent session. Good. I said, experiences are not facts. You see the sun go down every evening. Fine. It's not a fact. You see it go down. It's not a fact. Just a quick sidebar here, as it were. As a young man, I learned that experiences aren't facts, and I don't misunderstand me. I am not promoting the use of psychedelic drugs, but as a young man, I took psychedelic, as a kid, as a stupid teenager, reckless teenager. I took these psychedelic drugs. I had all kinds of amazing experiences, flying through space. Does my experience, and it was a very real experience. Does it make it a fact? Okay, you get the point. So, while every experience is not a fact, which is correct, every fact must ultimately be experienced to be known. Look at his argument. Every experience is not a fact, but you have to experience a fact in order to make it known. This is Praveen's conjecture, and it's not borne out by the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. I don't think it's borne out by any philosophy, to be honest. Do you need to experience something to know it? Tell me, do we know subatomic particles? You don't know. No, watch it. Do you experience subatomic particles is different? That's not what I'm asking. Do we know that atoms are composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons? We absolutely know that. Has anyone ever experienced an electron, a proton, or a neutron? Never. How about black holes in space? Which is a really good example because by definition, you can't experience a black hole. It's black. You can't see it. Is it a fact that they exist? According to science, these are facts, which are non-verifiable by your experience. And here we can recognize the limitations of experience. Experience depends on your means of experience, which are mostly your five senses: sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. Well, what about things that are beyond your five senses? By the way, in Advaita Vedanta, we acknowledge a sixth sense. It's called antahkarana, your mind. And that's important to acknowledge because through your five senses, can you experience truth, honesty, love? Is love something you can see, hear, taste, smell, or touch? No. So it is experienced, but through the sixth organ of knowledge we call mind, antahkarana. But do any of these six allow you to experience electrons, protons, and neutrons? Do any of these six allow you to experience black holes? This is the point. We have experience that's extremely powerful, but in its scope, it has a certain range. Anyway, let's see the Praveen is quite thoughtful here. He says, science often validates subjective experiences by finding higher vantage points. Understanding, for example, knowing that Earth rotates even though we experience the sunset. So is it fair to dismiss subtle experiential data like near-death experiences simply because they are subjective? Based on what we've just said, near-death experiences to me are like the psychedelic experiences I had as a kid. The fact that people have such experiences is undeniable. That I flew through space is an undeniable fact of my personal experience. Doesn't make it real. We interpret our experiences. If I were to misinterpret my experience of being able to fly through space, and if this happened, not to me, happened to others, if under the influence of drugs I climb up on a roof and try to fly, I will discover the hard way that my experience is not a fact. So anyway, with regard to near-death experiences, our subject, how does Advaita Vedanta categorize these fringe experiences? I just said they are fabrications of our minds. Our minds are extremely creative and powerful, so they come up with amazing experiences. Should we view them as valid data points for higher science of the self, or are they merely fluctuations of the mind, vrittis? I think that question has been answered. One of the main messages of Advaita Vedanta is experience has to be analyzed to know its validity or non-validity, as in the case of atoms and black holes. And to bring it home now, here's an example of experience. When you touch yourself, you feel like you are experiencing me, right? Is that a fact? If that is a fact, we might as well wind up this satsang right now, because there's no point in any of the teachings of Vedanta. This is a fact. It feels like me. But then we bring the teachings of Advaita Vedanta to bear upon this experience. We analyze the experiences, and we discover that it feels like me, because of the nerves present in this body, nerves which are connected to the spinal cord, run up to the brain and create all this stuff in my mind. Suppose, you've had this experience already, and I've given this example before. If you sleep at night on your arm, you wake up in the middle of the night and you touch this fleshy object in your bed and you wonder, what in the world is it? It's your own arm. It doesn't feel like you because it doesn't have sensation. So you get my point. Experiences alone are not enough. And that's why we have these teachings of Advaita. We'll have another question a little later on that topic. Pravina has a second question. Usually I don't take two, but this one is quite thoughtful, so we'll see this one. We recognize that the rishis as mantra drashtas, the ones who were the seers of these truths that they discovered. Mantra drashta, literally one who sees the mantras, one who gains the revelation of the Vedas. Another term that I like quite a bit for the ancient rishis is kranta darshi, one who can see beyond, one who can see what others can't see, one who can discover what others cannot discover. Given the passage of time and the potential loss of scriptures due to history, is it the Advaitic view that the frontier of, he writes very nicely, is it the Advaitic view that the frontier of spiritual knowledge is closed and that our only role is to verify what was written by these ancient rishis? Or can there be modern rishis who, by accessing the same source, interesting point, modern rishis who, by accessing the same source, can expand upon or reveal new dimensions of Vedantic knowledge relevant to our era? Is it not possible that there could be modern Krantadarshis? Why not? I haven't met any recently, but it is certainly logically possible that a modern person could have the ability of the ancient rishis to see beyond, as I said. But here's the tricky part. Praveen says, so they could be modern rishis who access the same source. Knowledge exists. Perhaps somehow you can discover that knowledge through some extraordinary capacity as a modern rishi. If there is such a thing, I'm just acknowledging it's possible, but we don't have any evidence of that. Further, though, this is the real problem, that these modern rishis could expand upon or reveal new dimensions of Vedic knowledge. New dimensions. Tell me, 1 + 1 = 2. Do you think someone's going to, at some point in the future, come up with new dimensions, expand upon or reveal new dimensions of that equation? 1 + 1 = 2. Well, the ancient rishis had their own equation. Tat, tvam, asi. It's an equation. Do you really think it could be expanded upon? 1 + 1 = 2 cannot be, you can't improve. Suppose you say, oh, that's so old-fashioned, let's update it. 1 + 1 = 2 is a simple identity, a simple truth. You can't improve upon it. What the ancient rishis taught is a simple, fundamental truth. Tattvamasi. It's an equation. Tat = tvam. You can't improve upon it. Does it mean that we can't bring new perspectives, modern perspectives to Vedanta? I do that every time I teach. We're teaching this ancient wisdom from a distinctly modern standpoint. But am I adding anything? Am I saying that tut equals twum plus some fudge factor? I'm not no modern teacher of Advaita Vedanta can modify or improve upon the fundamental discoveries made by the ancient rishis. Enough said. Next. Ulhas asks a question. Doesn't say where he lives. Ulhas says, I have read that most of the stories in the Puranas are not factual. In the Bhagavad Gita, even though Sri Krishna and Arjuna had a talk, I have a feeling English is not Ulhas's native language, and that's perfectly okay. If you write in Hindi, I might not understand clearly. Most Hindi I can understand, but anyway, better to write in English. So in the Bhagavad Gita, you read Bhagavanu Vacha, Sri Krishna says, but because Vyasa Muni wanted to elevate it to a higher level. In other words, Vyasa himself, the author of the Mahabharata, including the Bhagavad Gita, is not, he himself doesn't take Sri Krishna as true. So where does truth lie when we read these ancient stories in the Puranas and Bhagavad Gita? We've talked about this topic again, but again, it's a question so many people have and struggle with. So let me give you what I think is a very highly reasoned perspective. There are two kinds of stories. There are historical stories and non-historical stories, ahistorical stories. So let's separate out these two categories of stories. Historical stories are Sri Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield in Kurukshetra having this discussion. That is a historical story. What is a non-historical story? A non-historical story would be Brahmaji and Lord Vishnu getting into an argument about who's greater, who's more powerful. That's not a historical story. Sri Krishna having a discussion with Arjuna took place on a battlefield in a certain day at a certain time of day. Tell me, this argument between Brahmaji and Vishnu, did it happen on a Tuesday or a Thursday? At what time of day? You get my point. So first we begin by distinguishing between historical stories and what scholars would call ahistorical stories. Fine. So historical stories like Sri Krishna and Arjuna, are they true or not? It's more complicated than that. Much more complicated than that. If you understand the history of literature and the history of how the Mahabharata evolved from a simple story to 84,000 verses, in that process of evolution, a lot of things got added along the way. Let me just put it in very simple terms. Historical stories like the story in the Mahabharata must have started with a historically true event. There's no reason to doubt. Why should we doubt? Do you think tribes ever have conflicts and wars in ancient times? You would be silly not to admit that such a war, as recorded in the Mahabharata, extremely likely. But now, so there's no reason to doubt the historicity of a war, of Pandavas, of Kauravas, and why not? There's no necessity to doubt the historicity of even Arjuna and Sri Krishna. Where we doubt the historicity is when you have brahmastras, So Arjuna fires an arrow, and that arrow turns into an atomic bomb and destroys hundreds and thousands of people. That we might doubt. Or chariots that fly through the sky, or all kinds of amazing, miraculous events. Those we can doubt. So we don't doubt the fundamental historical story, but we can certainly doubt all these other things which have undoubtedly been, sorry to use that word, undoubtedly been added for the sake of storytelling. Right? When you tell stories, in American English, you juice up the story. You spice it up. In Indian terminology, you have to add some masala to make that story more attractive, more interesting. So no doubt, there was a historical Mahabharata Yuddha war, there are historical Shri Krishna and Arjuna, but we can distinguish that a lot of things have been added. But adding the fact that the Mahabharata has stories of atomic bombs and flying chariots doesn't mean that it's a fairy tale. So that's where we have to be a little bit more discerning in our analysis. It's not a lump thing. There are different parts in that Mahabharata, a historically true story, and lots of elaboration, fantastic elaboration. Now that's true for historical stories. What about ahistorical stories? This argument between Brahmaji and Vishnu. Easy. So we can certainly say it is a story that was written not to record a factual event, a historical event. It was a story written to teach religious and spiritual principles. Simple. So we can distinguish. The Puranas are ahistorical for the most part. And therefore these Puranic stories do not convey historical truths. Their stories are meant to convey religious and spiritual principles, unlike the historically true central story we find in Mahabharata, Ramayana, and elsewhere. Lots of mythological elaboration, but a historically true core story. So it's a little complicated. And one of the challenges in life is not to oversimplify. We all have that tendency. We want to understand clearly, so therefore we resort to oversimplification, which is usually a problem. Another question here. This question from Sumant, who lives in California. Second of the questions. Why do we describe Brahman as Sat Chit Ananda if Brahman is nirguna? Nirguna means without qualities. Actually, the statement given in scripture in Taittiriya Upanishad is Brahman is satyam, jnanam, anantam, which are pretty much synonymous with Satchidananda. So we say Brahman is satyam, jnanam, anantam. Atma is Satchidananda, but Brahman is Atma. So satyam, jnanam, anantam is Satchidananda. Okay, this is what Vedanta teaches. But then on the other hand, then we say that Brahman has no qualities. Atma has no qualities. Nirguna, nirvishesha. These terms are used, and they're correct. So how do we reconcile these two perspectives that say Atma or Brahman, nirvishesha, nirguna, without qualities, without distinctions, and then on the other hand we say, oh, but there's Satchidananda, Satyam Jnanam Anantam. And here this is a little technical, but it's a technical question. So Satyam Jnanam Anantam are not visheshanas, they're not adjectives, they're not qualities. Qualities are like the color orange is a quality. This cloth could be any color, but it happens to be the color orange. So orange is a guna, a quality, a visheshana, a distinction, a adjective we use in English. Visheshana means adjective. So color is an adjective. So now the question is satyam, jnanam, anantam, or satchidananda, are these words adjectives? If they're adjectives, we've got a problem, right? If they're adjectives, they're like the color of this cloth. But here's the point. This orange is, again, this is a technical part, a little bit of grammar, but you can definitely handle this. Orange is considered a visheshana, an adjective, a qualifier, because this cloth could exist in different colors. Therefore, it is not essential. The orangeness of this cloth is not essential. It's not fundamental to the cloth. It's changeable. We say Brahman is satyam, or sat. Is that sat an adjective? If it's an adjective, then we should have different kinds of Brahmins. Some kinds of Brahmins are sat, and some kinds of Brahmins are not. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense, because sat is not an adjective. How about jnanam? Some kinds of Brahman are conscious, some kinds of Atma are conscious, others are unconscious. No. Jnanam or chit, not adjectives. And finally, ananta. These are ananta, limitless, boundaryless. These are words that reveal not qualities. The word that we use in Sanskrit is they reveal the swarupa. In Sanskrit, they're called swarupa lakshanas. Lakshana is a word that indicates. And these are words that indicate not as adjectives, but they indicate the essential nature of the thing. So just as orange is not a swarupa lakshana of this cloth, contrary-wise, Satchidananda and Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, they are Swarupa Lakshanas. They're not adjectives. They're not changeable. They indicate the actual essence of Brahman. Therefore, nirguna, one of the essential defining attributes of Brahman is nirguna, which is what ananta means. Ananta, limitless, boundaryless, includes being free from qualities or attributes. Now, if you get stuck on the word ananda, we've discussed that many times. Ananda also is not an experience of happiness that comes and goes. Ananda, properly understood, is not an experience, is not an adjective. It reveals the swarupa of Atma. That's not the question, so we won't go further into it right here. Then, we're doing on time, good. Question from Mary. Mary lives in Austria. I think we have a lot of new students now because we launched this online course, and we're getting a lot of students. Perhaps Mary is one of those students from Austria. Welcome. Mary says, Mary is responding to something I think I said in one of the first lessons in the course, that we need to use words very carefully in spiritual pursuit. She says, it's important to know exactly what words mean in order to understand things properly. And an example you may have heard me give before, if we use the English word soul, what does it mean? There are so many different ways of defining what is soul. It's very confusing. Therefore, we don't use the word soul. Better to use Sanskrit terminology, which is more specific. But then Mary goes on and she asks, and could you please tell us from the perspective of Advaita Vedanta, what do these English words mean? Words like blessing, grace, divinity, prayer, personal relationship with Ishvara. How can we understand these more carefully with more insight, with more precision, instead of using these English words like blessing and grace. The Sanskrit here, the precise Sanskrit word is less important than the meaning. The Sanskrit word for blessing or grace is anugraha. So what? It's just a word. But the concept of anugraha in Sanskrit is very different than the Western concept of anugraha. The Western concept of divinity, grace and blessings and prayer is there is some, by the way, some Hindus share this perspective, but it's not an Advaita Vedanta perspective. So let's make a distinction. It's not just Western. It's just kind of, we'll say, more general perspective as opposed to an Advaita Vedanta perspective. So the general perspective on grace, blessing, divinity, both in India and in the West, the general perspective is there's some guy up there. It's always a guy, right? Why is it always a guy? Anyway, our Father who art in heaven, etc., etc. Okay, some guy up there, if he's in a good mood because you've said your prayers and you've acted and you've done good deeds, then he'll give you some goodies. And if he's not in a good mood, or if you do something wrong, then watch out, that lightning bolt is going to come down and the guy's going to zap you. I'm being silly just to illustrate kind of the more conventional idea of what is divinity, what are prayers, what are blessings, and this is not at all the Vedantic perspective of Ishvara. Ishvara, we can say, you can use English words like God or Lord, but those words aren't adequate. Ishvara is not some guy up there who is going to bless you or hurt you according to your prayers or bad deeds. Rather, Ishvara is the creator of the cosmos who abides in the world as the intelligence that makes the world function. Ishvara is present in the world both as the stuff of the world and as the intelligence of the world. This is a huge topic. I don't want to get into the technicalities, but just to respond in general to Mary's question. So from a Vedantic standpoint, Ishvara is not that guy up in some heavenly domain. Ishvara is present here now as the substance and intelligence of the world in which we live. And according to the intelligence of the world in which we live, if you do harmful deeds, you are going to suffer as a consequence. Guaranteed. That's a principle of the world. Is that Ishvara is punishing you? No, you're not being punished. It's a consequence of the way the world is put together in such an intelligent way that if you do harmful deeds, sooner or later, we don't know when, sooner or later, you will suffer a consequence for those bad deeds. That is due to, we would say, Ishvara's intelligent order. And again, according to Ishvara's intelligent order, if you are engaged in prayer and worship, and maybe more importantly, if you're engaged in good deeds, deeds which help people, deeds which remove suffering, then, according to Ishvara's intelligent order, you will receive what we generally call blessings. Not that somebody up there decides to bestow a blessing on you, but rather as a consequence of your own good deeds, you are blessed according to Ishvara's order. She makes a comment here. I have read that Swami Tadatmananda, my guru, has described prayer as only being auto-suggestion. I never heard him say that prayer is auto-suggestion. He has commented that there is an element of auto-suggestion in prayer, in meditation, in everything we do, but he has never said that prayer is auto-suggestion. So she said she read somewhere. Well, there are plenty of second and third hand information. My guru never said that prayer works, but not in the way you think it does. And maybe this is a point that Mary is referring to. We generally think of prayer as like asking someone for a favor. And definitely my guru dismisses that kind of perspective. It's not Advaitic. It's not the Advaita perspective. So the Advaita perspective is not that prayer is asking for a favor, but prayer is an act. Prayer is a pure act of good karma, which has a good result. Okay, enough said. Take one more question here. We'll see then if we have any questions from our local students. There's a question from Sunita, who lives in Bangalore. Sunita, I like the way she expresses this. My mother and I are engaged in an admittedly silly but long-running debate. While we agree on many things, we can't seem to agree on this. One of us says that when you're enlightened, enlightenment completely frees a person from emotions like anger and sorrow. And the enlightened person never feels angry or sad. And the other contends that those emotions still arise but are experienced differently. No suffering arises from you. So can you please settle this? So we don't know who is who, but mother and daughter, good argument. Better than arguing over, oh, there's too much salt in this dish. Don't argue about trivial things like this. Argue about important things. That's good. That's the right kind of argument to have with your mother. All right, not about cooking. Or about dress. How many daughters argue with mother? Mothers and daughters argue about what is appropriate dress, what is inappropriate dress, or ornaments, all of this stuff. It was good. Sunita and mother are arguing about something of importance here. Does an enlightened person feel emotions like angry and sad? This is another good example of how we oversimplify things. All emotions are not the same. Before we go there, first of all, does an enlightened person feel emotions? I sure hope so. If you don't feel emotions, you're hardly a human being, right? Emotions make us human. Emotions make us sensitive. Emotions make us empathetic, tender, caring. So absolutely, emotions make us human. Are enlightened beings human or not? Okay. Enough said. Enlightened beings experience emotions. Somebody who's enlightened goes and watches a really sad movie. Do they come out of the theater and say, I don't get it? So they watch remember that Titanic movie? So they watch she dies in the end, in this cold water. And the enlightened person watches Titanic, I don't get it. Why was he so upset? No, he dies. I don't even remember the movie. He dies. She survives. He dies. And then she's telling the story after the fact. So she remembers this person she was in love with died in the cold waters. So the enlightened person emerges after watching the movie. I don't get it. Why everyone in the theater was crying? What was what's wrong? That's silly, right? The enlightened person gets it and feels sad. The sadness you feel in a movie theater, it's not fake sadness, it's sadness. But here's where we oversimplify. All emotions are not the same. Can an enlightened person feel sad? Absolutely. How about this? Can an enlightened person feel jealous? That's different. What a different kind of emotion, right? Sadness is a very fundamental kind of human emotion. Jealousy involves all kinds of complicated things like comparison, self-judgment. I'm not good enough. What did that person do to deserve it? All of this stuff. Does an enlightened person feel all of that? Definitely not. So, an enlightened person will not experience jealousy at all. Not even a trace. Why? An enlightened somebody else has everything. I have nothing. Who cares? It's all stuff. An enlightened person knows I am Satchidananda Atma. What difference does it make whether somebody has something or doesn't have something? So no possibility of jealousy. More interesting one, though, is anger, which is what Sunita mentions here. Can an enlightened person experience anger? If you mean genuine anger, I would say no, not a chance. Why? What makes you angry? You feel transgressed upon. You feel attacked. An enlightened person will never feel attacked, will never feel transgressed upon, will never feel threatened, will never feel harmed. You shout words, all these four-letter words, you shout at the enlightened person, they're words. So the enlightened person will never feel hurt or transgressed upon, therefore will never feel that genuine anger. But now let me give a counterexample. How about, we always talk to everyone, we're back to this, the guy up there. Why is the enlightened person always the enlightened man? Who says? The enlightened woman. An enlightened mother taking care of her 1-year-old is outside in a park, and her 1-year-old starts walking towards a busy street. What does she do? She shouts at this 1-year-old. She looks angry and worried. Is she angry and worried? If she is an enlightened mother, she expresses anger and fear to this child to impress upon the child the importance of not wandering into busy roads. Is she angry or fearful? No. She behaves in that way because it's how mothers behave when their child is walking into a busy street. It's normal behavior. And it's helpful behavior because it avoids future problems for the child. So that enlightened mother wouldn't feel angry or worried, even though she may behave in a way that looks like anger or fear. It is normal behavior which has a purpose of preventing harm to her child. Okay. Excuse me. We have a few more important questions here. Before any questions from our local students, you need the microphone. We got this one fixed so we can see you today. Please.
This might be sort of a pedantic question, but in one of the introduction to Vedantic courses, I recall you saying, bring up pain and suffering. And so say someone has a headache versus an enlightened person having a headache, the enlightened person doesn't suffer. But you said it's not a choice to suffer. And I understand as a binary, like freedom from suffering wouldn't be a choice, but say like a child gets a paper cut versus an adult, wouldn't you say the child wouldn't suffer, or the child would suffer, but the adult wouldn't suffer. So,
Okay.
are there some ways where you can, some scenarios where you modulate your suffering?
Some scenarios where you modulate your suffering. Can you maybe give an example? Because I'm not quite getting it.
Well, I guess like maybe if you've lost a loved one, you could dwell on it.
Okay.
Like in later times.
Good example.
That's
That's helpful. That's a good example. Can an enlightened, you can be seated, please. Can an enlightened person modulate their sorrow? And my interesting choice of word. I like that word, in fact. Yeah. So an enlightened person feels sad. Can that sadness be modulated? And you gave an excellent example. The grief of the loss of a loved one. When an enlightened person loses a loved one, will they feel sad? Absolutely. Will they feel grief? Yes. But I would say, in fact I know, that grief can be modulated. I like your word. In other words, an unenlightened person would indulge in, not indulge is not the right, an unenlightened person would have all kinds of thinking and emotions which make them feel even worse. Like, oh, this is horrible. Oh, why did that happen? If it's in the hospitals, why did the doctors do this? Why didn't they do that? Or how can I go on living without the person? Life has no meaning. Why did the person have to die so soon? All of this stuff adds a lot to that suffering. Does the enlightened person get engaged in all of that? No. That's a kind of modulation. The enlightened person would not be drawn into kinds of thinking and feeling that make the suffering worse. Even further, modulating. At a time of great loss, is it possible for an enlightened person to feel perfect contentment? You bet. Loss is a natural human emotion. Contentment is not what you feel, it's who you are. And that's a little abstract, so let me put it in some very simple terms. An enlightened person knows, I am okay no matter what. We call that contentment, but contentment is an English word which doesn't quite capture the sense. I am okay no matter what. Even though my loved one has died, I am okay, because my true nature is Satchidananda Atma, unchanging consciousness. That consciousness itself is not impaired or lessened or harmed by that loss. So an enlightened person in the midst of grieving could reflect on the fact that I am okay in spite of this loss. The grief would still be felt. Just like in a movie theater. You know the sorrow, you feel sorrow. And there's a good distinction. We'll end with this observation. In the movie theater, you enjoy the sorrow. Maybe enjoy is too strong a word. It doesn't make you feel like life has no meaning. Because you know the sorrow is false. You know that you are okay in spite of whatever terrible thing you just saw on the screen. An enlightened person feels the same in day-to-day life. They experience the sorrow, they experience the grief, but they don't take it seriously, like the movie theater sorrow. Good, good question. Any other questions here? Okay, we have some more good questions. Here we'll take up. This is from Pankaj, who lives in Scotland. Nice. Pankaj says, I came across an Advaita Vedanta teaching that the experiencer and experience are one and the same. Non-duality. We'll take your question later. Experiencer and experience are one and the same. Non-duality. Is that statement factually accurate from an Advaitic Vedantic perspective? The statement is accurate, but it's confusing, isn't it? Which is why I generally don't use that kind of language. It is true, experiencer and experience are one and the same, but I generally don't use that kind of language because what exactly does that mean? So Pankaj says, I came across the Advaitic Vedantic teaching that experiencer and experience are one and the same. You probably didn't come across it from me. On the other hand, there are plenty of Vedantic teachers who would use that expression. The experiencer and experience are the same. How can you say such a thing? Why is it true from an Advaita Vedanta statement, from standpoint of Advaita? If it is true, then is Atma the experience? Atma and Brahman are the same. Experience is Brahman. Brahman is not the experiencer, so how can Atman be an experiencer? You see the confusion that comes based on that statement. It is a true statement, but I would say it's not very helpful to say experiencer and experienced are the same. So therefore, instead of using that language, I would simply use different language. What language would I use? Experience and experiencer are not fundamental realities. There is a fundamental reality called consciousness. That consciousness is non-dual. That non-dual consciousness appears in many forms. Like clay appears as a pot, non-dual consciousness appears in the form of experiencer and experienced. Now we can now it becomes kind of simple. There is one fundamental reality, non-dual reality, consciousness. That non-dual consciousness in your experience is in many ways, like just as clay can be in the form of this pot or so many other things, non-dual consciousness can appear in many forms, like the form of experience, that kind of makes sense, and even in the form of experiencer. Takes quite a bit of Vedanta to get there. I'm not going to go into the details, but if you understand enough Vedanta, you'll know that not only is your experience an expression of non-dual consciousness, even the status of being an experiencer is a manifestation of non-dual consciousness. So notice the statement. He says, experiencer and experience are one and the same. It's technically true, right? It's just like two pots. If I had another pot here, and I say this pot and this pot are one and the same, it's technically true, but it would be kind of confusing, wouldn't it? Because they sure look different. So that's this is why Advaita Vedanta is a little... If we use the wrong language, it gets very confusing very fast. If I hold up two pots, here we go. This isn't a pot, but it will do in a pinch. If I hold up two pots and say these two pots are identical, it sounds really confusing. But if I say this pot is fundamentally clay and this pot is fundamentally clay, it makes a lot more sense. Rather than saying this pot is the same as this pot. It's a matter of language. It's a matter of teaching methodology. And one thing, just a little bit of a tangent, what makes these, and you've heard me say this before, what makes these teachings of Advaita Vedanta so remarkable is not what they teach, but how they teach. This teaching methodology is, the more I teach, the more I come to be amazed by its capacity to remove confusion. And if we don't use these teachings of Advaita properly, we get confused. And this is true of what's called Neo-Advaita. There's a lot of non-Shankara Advaita teachings, and so that non-Shankara Advaitin will say, yep, sure enough, everything is one. This pot is the same as this pot. You are the same as me. The tree is the same as a rock. Everything is one consciousness. All of these statements are true, but they don't make sense. They're not helpful. And they're not helpful because they don't employ this amazing methodology used in Advaita Vedanta. Okay. We're short on time, so we'll just take maybe one more question here. This is actually related to an earlier question. This question comes from Vishwajit, who also from Bangalore. I've noticed over the years a lot of questions from Bangalore. What's going on there? I've spent some time there. It's and not recently. Anyway, you've often stated that personal experiences. This is Vishwajit's question. Personal experiences cannot be used to establish fact or truth. So that's that earlier question, the second question we took up today. Vishwajit goes on to say, I also understand that the method of Vedanta for realizing the self or truth involves shruti, yukti, and anubhava. Shruti, scripture, yukti, reasoning, anubhava, experience. How to reconcile this? So I just got done saying that we don't use experience, but then shruti, yukti, anubhava. Well, you didn't watch my language carefully enough. I said we don't use experience alone to establish a fact. In fact, sorry. In fact, we use this statement, shruti, yukti, anubhava, that is to say that the means for gaining knowledge is threefold. Scripture, scriptural revelation, the wisdom of the ancient rishis, combined with yukti, reasoning, combined with anubhava, experience. Another way of saying it is that truth is like a table with 3 legs, 3 foundations. If you have a 3-legged table, take away any one of the legs, the table falls over. Notice that's not true for a table with 4 legs or more. These 3 are the fundamental bases for truth, for fact. So what is the role of experience? Not that experience proves anything, but rather whatever is truth should be consistent with experience. This is a little subtle. Let me say that again. Experience doesn't prove truth, but what is true must be consistent with experience. Experience doesn't establish truth, but whatever is true should be consistent with experience. Like whatever is true should be consistent. That's abstract. So let me put it in more concrete terms. Whatever is revealed by the ancient rishis should be consistent with reasoning and experience. It shouldn't be contrary to experience. And Shankara is famous for this statement, comes in his Bhagavad Gita commentary. He says, if thousands of scriptural statements were to say that fire is cold, Shankaracharya himself says, I would reject every one of those scriptural statements. Why? Fire is cold is against reason and it's against experience. That's what I mean, that it has to be consistent, not just with reason, but consistent even with your experience. So, we have this threefold basis for truth. The threefold basis includes anubhava experience as one of the three, but one is not enough. Can you have a one-legged table? I'm talking about tiny little legs, right? Don't imagine a big leg. Tiny little leg. One leg won't work, which means any one of the three won't work. Shruti alone. By the way, there are a couple more questions maybe next week, if you have further questions here. Let me end with this observation. There's no one-legged table, which means you can't pick shruti, yukti, or anubhava. You need all three. Shruti alone, faith alone. Faith alone is the hallmark of Protestant Christianity. That's their main thing. Faith alone. Not faith alone. In fact, a lot of Christians themselves reject faith alone. Catholics reject faith alone. Other religions reject faith alone. Christian mystics reject faith alone. So a one-legged table, shruti, is not enough. How about two-legged table? Shruti and reasoning. Again, it's not enough. So, and here's I'm looking for an example. Buddhism. Buddha says there is no such thing as self. Shruti, revelation. There's tons of Buddhist logic to support that statement, that there is no such thing as a conscious self, anatma. So you have shruti and yukti, you have revelation of Buddha, you have lots of Buddhist logic that supports it. What about anubhava? If I say you don't exist, you are not conscious, does your anubhava support that? Or is that statement inconsistent with your experience? You get it? Completely inconsistent. So anubhava, notice that anubhava doesn't prove anything, but rather these three together give a solid foundation for faith and a solid foundation for truth. A final statement. Unshakable truth. Faith alone is vulnerable to being shaken. Logic alone is vulnerable to being, you have logic, you have some counter-logic. Whatever you establish logically, you can come up with some other logic and to dismiss it. And similarly for experience, whatever you experience might be true, might not be true. So each one of them alone are not, they are shakeable, to use that term. The three of them together, unshakable. That's what we call truth. Okay, Lots of good questions today. We'll conclude with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat. See you next time.